Dr. McKenna, what is top of mind for you today?
Kind of a ridiculous thing, Sabbath. So recently, my wife and I are big paddle boarders, stand-up paddle boarders. And so we sold the hard boards we had and we got inflatable boards so that we could actually travel easier with them. And this is why I'm telling you this, is that we got them last Christmas. I bought them as a surprise. I'm like, hey, let's do this. But we didn't get a chance to use them until just a few weeks ago because, the weather got better. And after inflating them, and then they worked and we hit the water. And then I put one of them, I put them on the side of the house. And then I went over there and my wife, she was back there. We have what's called country living on the side of our house. I don't know if anyone else does. It's where all the junk goes, in our home. And they were deflating. And I tell you this because like now one of them's in the garage and I'm just watching this and it's just the dumbest little example, right? That they're my paddle boards I bought and now I'm like, can I still return them? Do I need to fix them? On top of that, I have a problem with my sprinkler system. It's not working quite right. The fence in my backyard, which we replaced 20 years ago, is now falling apart. And we have a new rescue dog, so there's more detail than you need. And then yesterday, I got a call from someone pretending to be my bank, telling me that there was a fraudulent charge on my card, which made me very frustrated that I lost 30 minutes with someone that was lying to me. And now, I just got to tell you this before we introduce our guest. I realize that these are privilege problems. Like I'm like, you know what I mean? Like these are not the worst things. Because if I'm honest, there are other things in my life, more personal and even more emotional, that also need fixing. Conversations that are overdue. I have tensions that still need to be addressed. I have responsibilities that I haven't quite had the capacity to handle. There's just it's going on. And this is why I'm just describing this to you because we are wired to move toward wholeness. Even in the midst of our brokenness, these
Mhm.
things that need to be maintained, whether it's a deflating paddleboard, a strained relationship, or losing a job, which, I have a lot of friends who are lost jobs later career even. They're trying to figure out what do I
Yeah.
do? We are constantly navigating that gap between what's falling apart and what we're trying to hold together, which for me brings us to trust. Like when our lives become overly fragmented, it's hard to sustain trust internally or with others. Trust requires maintenance. It requires foundations that are more whole than broken. Because when we're more whole, we're more grounded and we're more known and more real and we function better in everyday life. And some of that comes down to creating the conditions for wholeness to take root. And that's exactly what we're going to explore today. And I'm so excited for our guest today, Sabbath. You got to
Yes.
introduce her.
Yes. So let's get this wild conversation going. Welcome to the wild conversation where human being and human doing converge, reshaping the world of leadership, culture, and performance. Today, we get to have a wild conversation with Amy Edmondson. Amy has reshaped the way the world thinks about leadership, learning, and failure. Dr. Amy Edmondson is a Novartis professor at Harvard Business School and the pioneer behind the game changing concept of psychological safety. The idea that teams thrive when people feel safe to speak up, take risks, and be real. She's
Hmm.
the best selling author of The Fearless Organization and Right Kind of Wrong, and her research has transformed how we think about trust, innovation, and what it actually means to lead with courage. Amy is not just a world class scholar, she's a truth teller, a deep listener, and a bold voice, calling us back to something we all need more of: the safety to fail and the trust to grow. And she is a new friend of Wild Leaders. Amy, welcome to the Wild Conversation.
Sabeth, thank you. What a great introduction. Thank you.
Oh, we are so excited for this. And we didn't prep you for this quick opening part, but we're going to play a game, a round of wild cards. I know we have a deck of 52 cards with a different question on each card. I just pulled
Hmm.
10. So all we have to do is choose a number between 1 and 10, and we get to answer the question on the card. You can answer it in one word or one sentence, or if a story comes to mind, you're welcome to share that. So I'll go first. Amy, you can go after me, and then Dr. McKenna will round us out. So there's 10. I'm not even going to count. I'm just going to pull one out of the deck. It says, what is one thing you would like to be better at under pressure? This is a great question. Sab, good one. I would say taking a whole perspective. I think under pressure, one of my knee-jerk reactions is to create a story in my head and then move forward with that. And so one thing I'd like to be better at under
Mm,
pressure is pausing and taking a bigger perspective on
mm.
what's happening before I jump to conclusions. All right, Amy, you can pick a number.
4.
Okay. Who are you investing in?
Ooh, I guess that's a pretty easy one since I'm sitting here in my office at Harvard Business School. I am investing in my PhD students. I have two I'm really working very closely with at the moment. So and then I have a couple of former ones who I work very closely with as well. And that's the kind of investment that feels really good because it feels like the future. It's like I'm doing hard work, a lot of effort, a lot of time today, and I know it will pay off for them for years and even decades long after I'm in this role.
That's
I
amazing.
love that.
Okay, before I pick my card, I got to say one thing about that is when I would recruit doctoral students, I'd try to, they would come for their interviews. I would say doing a PhD is the hardest thing you will ever choose to do outside of getting married.
It's true. They both
And
require learning and
yeah,
mutuality. Yep.
I was trying to contract with them about
Yeah.
how awesome, I was like, this is the
Yep.
greatest thing ever,
It's
but it'd be
awesome.
the hardest thing you ever choose to do. So I so appreciate what you're describing. Sabbath, I'll do number 2.
Do you know what to say no to?
Come on, who wrote these questions? I think I'm in a season right now where I do. And I give a lot of credit to our leadership team of helping me understand my role, and helping me frame that, especially in our current state of our organization. So I would say I feel like I'm doing pretty well at this right now. And I would not have said that probably even a year ago. So
Hmm. Hmm.
think I do. Sabbath, thank you for that. Thank you
Such a
for
gift.
that. Amy, I'm so grateful for this conversation to be able to talk to another person who has spent a good portion of their life with their feet in both the academic world and the world of practice. Like how do you actually go do that? And so that is an amazing thing. Will you give us a little insight into Amy Edmondson? Like what's going on in life and work right now that you would say is like firing you up?
I suppose in some ways I've been fired up by the same basic issue and question for the last 40 years. And before I became a PhD student, I worked for 10 years, the last 4 of which were in a kind of a consulting company where it was a organizational development consulting. We built high performing teams and worked on leadership issues and taught the kinds of skills that we've been talking about even already, and that you talk about all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And my what caught my attention in that job was the kind of blinding flash of the obvious, which is that most of us spend most of our time at work, right? So
Mm.
work shouldn't suck, right? So how do we make work better, right? And that
Yeah.
became, and sort of both, how do we make, what are the small and large things we can do to make work meaningful, engaging. I'm not saying fun all the time, although some fun, but
Yeah.
I think we long as human beings to matter. And some of our mattering has to do with our family and our spouses and all of that, and our friends and our communities, but certainly some of it is our work and the ways in which we invest our effort to produce value. And sort of that interest in both making work better and more meaningful, but also realizing that organizations have to be able to thrive in a changing world. How do organizations learn? And that was kind of the puzzle that captured me. And I thought, I don't know how to answer this. I know, I'll go to a PhD program. Of course, what I learned pretty quickly is this isn't an easy question to answer, sort of a purely academic
Mm.
way, right?
Hmm.
What's the research question? How do you really get a hold of it? So very briefly, I think I realized that organizations don't learn, teams within organizations learn. I mean, it's a top management team, a frontline operations team, a sales team, an R&D team. The work that they're doing together is absolutely critical for ensuring that the organization it remains effective in a changing world. So that's how I sort of got interested in team dynamics. And yet
Mhm.
today, and what I'm working on right now is again, how do we engage people, hearts and minds, so that they can and will and want to and are honored for doing that learning together with others in a way that they're deeply contributing and listening and getting over themselves. Each of us is important, but we're not that important. We're all
Yeah.
important. So,
Yeah.
so all of those kind of almost fundamental philosophical and psychological phenomena, it seems no matter how much work we do, there's still more to do.
I relate to so many parts of that, even when you're talking about decades of this work.
Yeah,
How are you changing around that mission? Is there something that's
yeah,
shifting in you that even your
yeah,
doctoral students might be experiencing that they don't fully understand because they're newer
yeah,
to your, like
yeah.
embracing and coming alongside your identity as they do their work.
I think that the main way I've been changing is that I hope my doctoral students don't hear this. I'm just kidding. But they understand this. I tell them this all the time. I honestly have less patience for some of the aspects of the research program, meaning the way in which the peer review of studies happens. Over the years that I've been in this game, it's gone from if you do a really thoughtful study in a single organization. It happens to be cross-sectional and happens to be, some pretty insightful ideas. You could get a kind of A plus, and you could with lots of, hard work get through the review process. Now it seems increasingly the norm that the papers published in top journals have four, five, six studies, cross-sectional studies need not apply. And and in a way, if you I mean sometimes I get the sense that when we read them, they're certainly robust and precise, and not very actionable, and not necessarily helpful to the people I interact with in organizations around the world, in a day-to-day way. They don't help them sort of
Mm,
do their jobs better. They may be right, it's like they're accurate, but not useful. And I'm
yeah.
kind of interested in useful and, and obviously correct and right. But so
Yeah.
my poor students, they have to have other like younger faculty members working with them as well, because I'm really a big one for powerful ideas and conceptual clarity and conceptual rigor. I'm less and less patient with the kinds of methodological constraints and recommendations that are out there.
My goodness, do I relate? And I think so for our lay audience that's outside of that
Yeah,
world that you and I have
right.
lived, you feel, especially when you're mentoring doctoral students, there is a tremendous responsibility for things like what researchers call validity and reliability, just to give you a couple of terms. And
Yep.
and basically this responsible lens on data, like that you have a and
Yes.
there's a scientific method. I'm talking to people like, the CEO of a company we work with. It's like, what are they talking about? And so it's like,
Yeah.
but as a person who's mentoring other people, you have to give them that level of training so that they quite
Right.
literally have a job when they finish. Like
Right.
they have to be put through that buzzsaw to
Right.
begin to think deeply analytically. And so that tension that you're describing is something that I felt as well, where they understood that the process was going to do that, but in some cases they would turn that same research buzzsaw back on our work. So there's this tension that we face between doing responsible and rigorous and important research that does
Mhm.
change the world, and at the same time that something that people can actually consume.
At Harvard Business School, we like to use the term rigor and relevance, and I'm a
Yeah,
huge fan
correct.
of rigor. And I think rigor comes from very careful thought, from very close attention to the phenomenon and to data, and to holding yourself honest with the analyses you do. And just to be concrete, many studies in my field, which is organizational behavior and management, are now collecting data. To do six studies, you can't just, knock on the door of General Motors one day and then you're over at 3M another. Like they, that's not realistic. That doesn't happen. Whereas much of the research I've done, I've spent a lot of real time in real organizations collecting data, robust data, with validity, with reliability, and so on. And what I haven't done is sort of throw up causal studies on the internet and get data from platforms where you don't actually even know. Sometimes you don't even know if they're bots or people. But
Right.
I don't have a lot of confidence in what we can learn. I know we can do very clever demonstrations of causal relationships with some of those experimental designs, but they don't have the same face validity, and
Hmm.
and the same potential to be surprised by something you see and find in the field that you can't be surprised when have sort of designed the box. Then it's
Yes.
ultimately things inside the box.
Yeah. So good. Will you, one of the questions, so stepping back, and I know that you worked alongside Richard Hackman, and I'm curious, like I never got a chance to meet him. I think he died in 2013. And
That's
for those that don't know, like if you were a PhD student, anytime in the last 50 years. Like it's a long time. I don't know what the date is, but you would read Hackman's research on teams, and I'm curious about
yeah.
what he was like and his impact on you because. And so for our audience, also, there are so many people, the names of people that you don't know that had a profound impact on the way we organize today. And so another one is like
Mm,
Gary Latham is a friend. And it's like people
mhm,
don't know that
mhm.
Gary didn't coin the term smart goals, but he did the research, right? It's
Right,
like, so I'm
right.
curious about what Richard Hackman was like and his impact on you in those early years.
Well, Richard was great. I mean, first of all, Richard was utterly committed to the phenomenon. I mean, I think I got at least half of my appetite for digging deeply into the phenomenon to really understand what's going on from him. He was larger than life. He sort of never wore his shoes. He'd be in front of the classroom teaching without his shoes. I mean, he was sort of a idiosyncratic, very tall, 6'4" or 6'5" um, guy who could be quite provocative. He'd sort of ask the tough questions, but I think he loved learning. He loved being in organizations. He spent time in organizations that he was interested in, whether it was
Mm,
a basketball team or a cockpit cruise or you name it. He just would do it if intelligence teams, spies.
yeah.
He just really he loved the phenomenon, and I loved it too. So it was and as an advisor, I really felt that I had two advisors, very, very different personalities, Richard Hackman and Chris Argyris, but
Hmm.
um, he would never tell you what to do, which I kind of
Oh,
mimic. I imprinted on him.
uh,
He'd
uh,
say, I'd say, well, what should I do? He'd say,
yeah.
sorry, that's your question to answer. You have to decide. Well, just give me a dissertation topic and I'll do it. But no, he wouldn't do it, which drove me crazy because I was one of those people who did pretty well in school, and it's like if you give me something to do, or in my 10 years of work experience, I pretty much do it and then some. But so part of being a PhD student, as you kind of alluded to earlier, is finding your path. It's finding what you care about. I mean, advisors are there to help you do it well, to help you figure out how to articulate a good and answerable research question that's in the general domain that you care about. Like I said before, I came to school with this sort of general interest in how do we help organizations learn and how do we make work better. But that's not a research question. That's not a dissertation. Right? A dissertation
Yeah.
has to be, for example, mine. What are the key influences on team learning in organizations? Right. That becomes more answerable. And so Richard was very inspiring and very annoying at times, but
Yeah.
brilliant and
Yeah.
cared a lot about the world and about the field.
That's so interesting. You're familiar with, trust has been this deep well for us in developing trust and its connection to our focus on developing whole leader capacity and how it's connected into trust. It's been very interesting, Amy, because Shine's book on culture and leadership is like, it's such a foundational book. But what I was fascinated by in that book that he did is him saying that you cannot disconnect the two. You can't disconnect leadership from culture. You have to think about them together, which is it's a slightly more complex thing than
Yeah,
just saying I'm going to talk about these things separately. So what does that mean?
right.
So I'm really curious, in your mind, what is the relationship between trust and psychological safety?
There's one way I could answer this, and which would be, it's not a difference that matters very much. Like
Uh,
and so I'll answer it that way first, which is the primary difference is academic, which is that trust refers to a dyadic relationship. Like you trust me, or you trust Coca-Cola, you
yeah.
trust Toyota, right? But it's one person's assessment of another entity's likelihood of doing what it says it's going to do, whether for intention reasons or competence reasons. It's my belief in your likelihood of following through.
Yeah.
Psychological safety, it's a climate. It's an emergent property of a group. So it's not dyadic. It's the way things are in this group. It's people's taken for granted beliefs about what is safe and appropriate to do in this group that emerges out of shared experiences that they've had. It could be experiences they've had very quickly, right? It's not months and years of experiences. I mean, we might get together in a brand new team for some reason, and pretty soon I have a belief about what it's like around here, because of
Mm,
a variety of things. So that's the academic answer, or quasi-academic technical answer, I guess you could say. And the other way I would answer that question is I would say that psychological safety essentially describes an environment where trust and respect are high. Mutual
mm.
trust and mutual respect are high. So I am willing to speak up with a crazy idea, or to say I need help, or to say I've made a mistake in this group, because fundamentally I know there's trust here and there's respect here, right? I'm not going to instantly be kicked out of the group because I made a mistake. That belief exists when we kind of respect each other's character and ability, and we kind of also have mutual trust, and like off we go.
Yeah. So when we had Stephen Covey on a few weeks ago, one of the things that, as I reread his work on In the Speed of Trust, he says something that I say often is that you can measure trust, that it's something that you can actually measure, and that you don't measure trust by asking about trust.
Right. Right.
It's like that's the real story. Is like you don't get trust by talking about trust. You get it by doing a
Right.
bunch of other things. And what was fascinating to me is in his book, he talks about measurement, but we had a great conversation about this. He was saying you can measure trust because you can measure speed and cost. So he was saying if you can measure increasing speed
Huh.
and decreasing cost, you can measure trust. To which I found fascinating because he's looking at it as an outcome. So if I can measure the outcomes, I can back
Yeah.
into trust. And I told him, I said, I didn't set out to study trust.
Right.
Set out to develop whole leaders and study like the whole leader journey. And what we found is that as we
Yeah.
were doing these fundamental things that are the foundations of our field, right? Just having conversations around motivations and personality and competence, and that what was happening was trust was increasing. So what we had this
Yeah.
conversation around is this triangulation onto trust, right? From the outcome side and from the driver's side, which is why I'm so interested in this conversation with you, because I started thinking about psychological safety and I'm like looking at the order of variables. And I was thinking about in reading some of your work again, I started to think, well, psychological safety in many ways I mean, I know this is oversimplification, but it's a precursor to trust.
Yeah, or
Okay.
it's an outcome of trust. I mean, it's sort of
It's
it's
interesting,
it's a
right?
chicken egg guy, right?
Yeah.
That is, and it at some level doesn't matter which one's first, because you can clearly see that there will be mutual reinforcement, right? That there'll be either
Yes.
positive or negative feedback loops uh, acting.
Yeah, that is so interesting. In the words that you use to describe psychological safety, I love how you said it's dyadic, which means it is inherently relational.
Right,
It's
right. It
like
doesn't
it's
exist in
it's
the absence of a
it's but
relationship.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
between us, right? It's in
Right.
it. That's what makes it so powerful and so complex sometimes. Would this be accurate to say that when you describe psychological safety, it's like it's a condition within a group, or you use
Yeah.
a different word to
Yeah,
describe
I
that?
said it's an emergent property. I said it's a climate.
Yes.
It's not the sum total of our personalities and preferences, right? It's not a personality factor. It's not introversion or extroversion. It's these subtle signals that we're all reading about, is it okay here to speak up, to take risks, to be real?
Yeah. So you've often said that I'm making sure I'm quoting you correctly, that psychological safety isn't about being nice.
Right.
That it's that there's this thing about candor and risk taking that's a part of it. I'm kind of curious, what would you say to people? Because I do often people use this term that you that you put in the world and as this concept that everyone needs to feel psychologically safe all the time.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so will you say
Yeah,
something about that, what
yeah,
that
yeah.
snort was about?
Yeah. I mean, well, first of all, that's not the human condition, right? I mean, because
Mm,
anyway, what I would rather say is that much of the time we, like it or not, need to be learning, right? We need to be growing our skills. We need to be understanding more about each other. We need to be more understanding more about the uh, environment or the customer's needs or whatever. Like if we stand still and stop learning, we'll start being obsolete. So we are, we don't have to do 24/7 learning, but much of our living time needs to be spent in a state of learning.
mm,
You meet a new friend, you have to learn about them, and they have to learn about you. And learning is inherently uncomfortable, right? Because it means I don't know already. I'm not good at this already. I have to learn. So psychological safety is far better described as a learning environment, an environment where you believe the awkwardness and interpersonal risks of learning are possible, that they're not, it doesn't require heroics, to learn here. It's like, yeah, this is what we do. I'm here with my colleagues. I'm here with my teammates, and we're going to learn. So it's, I guess this is a long-winded way of saying psychological safety is not a state of comfort. Safety means freedom from harm, right? It doesn't mean comfort. And I think that's if the term was psychological comfort, that would be different. So it's meant to convey that, if you make a mistake, you're not going to be instantly humiliated or kicked out of the group, right? Because all of us make mistakes. Like we have to be okay being human with each other.
we don't build trust by pretending to be whole. We build it by becoming whole, making an intentional investment in developing whole leaders and measuring a wild trust, a kind of trust between each other that is our deepest aspiration, that fulfills our wildest needs and expectations. That is at the core of this book, Whole Leaders, Wild Trust. This isn't a book about being perfect. It's about being real. It's about the courage it takes to show up, to lead not just with strategy, but with soul. Because in today's world, trust isn't a luxury, it's a requirement.
So that's why it's just so important to say it's not about being comfortable.
This is so fun because I'm asking you impossible questions, but they're important questions. It's like, where is that line between freedom to make mistakes and freedom from harm?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't want I think this is really important because I'm not saying we should have freedom to make mistakes. I actually think we should all do our very best to not make mistakes. Now, a mistake is defined as a deviation from existing
Yeah,
practices or knowledge, right? You can't
yeah,
make a mistake in new territory, right? If I've never done this before, or better yet, no one's ever done this before, there's no such thing as a mistake. There's only a foray into new territory that might result in a failure. That's okay. But failure and mistake aren't the same thing.
yeah,
So I think we should all aspire to be in teams and work environments where we aim to keep mistakes as few and far between as possible. And we know they will happen because we're human, we're fallible. So
yeah.
what that really means is we're all in or must be in the catch and correct business. right? If
Mm.
we sort of tell people, hey, you have to be, you have to be error free, the only thing they will hear in that message is, okay, I better hide the errors. And we don't want that because we're in the catch and correct business. So we have to say, we're in we want to aspire to do great work. We want to be really careful and vigilant and thoughtful about not making mistakes in familiar territory. And we want to be extremely open to, even enthusiastic about the new knowledge we get from failures in new territory.
One of the things that I've been curious about that I just, if you had multiple lifetimes, you could do all the research you wanted to do on everything. And
Right.
it's like you have to pick your path. I've been so impacted by that original was called the Lessons of Experience research, and that idea that we develop leader capacity on the job primarily, and it's like as people are doing their thing in one of
Right.
the most, and I know this is a deep body of work for you, and one of the most powerful spaces of lessons is it's not just this, but in the space of failure. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just one of those categories of experiences that were very, very powerful. I also tell people, one of the other very powerful ones was role models, like experiences involved a role model,
Yeah.
and that 1/3 of the time, according to that research, it was a bad one. So what I always tell people is like, if you're
Yes.
a horrible mentor or role model for someone, the good news is that you're providing a profound leader development moment for them, which is not fun. But
Yeah,
so
it's a great reframe.
it is, right? It's like, but I want them to aspire to be a good one. But um, and one thing I've always been curious about is that there used to be a thing called job fills. And so when I was leaning into that work and learning from people like Morgan McCall and other folks who had done that initial work, and where what corporations were doing was, let's say that Sabeth on our team has a 50-50 chance of succeeding or failing in a role.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
we would surround Sabbath, like this is what we were teaching organizations to do back in the 90s and early 2000s, is surround Sabbath with what we called 100% fills. So surround Sabbath with people that won't fail. One thing I've always been kind of challenged by is if you take away the possibility of failure, and let me go one step further, and even the possibility of harm, do you still get the same lesson from it? Even like sometimes those failures were not fun. So we're not talking about
No.
like the failures that developed tremendous leader capacity were oftentimes things where people didn't just forget to take the garbage out.
Right.
They let other people down and they made an even
Yep.
ethical error, an error of character. It was like, and
Yep.
they're like, this was horrible, but I learned so much, but I
Mm.
never would want anyone else to have to go through it. How do you think about failure and even this concept of harm within this space? I
Yeah.
love this.
Yeah.
Psychological
So
safety sounds so dynamic, when we think about
it
it that
is.
way.
It
Yeah.
is. Yeah, there's so much here to unpack. But I earlier said, mistake and failure aren't the same thing. And,
Hmm.
mistake is a deviation from existing knowledge, right? And in familiar, so it has to be, if it's existing, means it's known territory. A failure is an undesired outcome. Now, some failures
Hmm.
are due to mistakes, and some mistakes are more unforgivable than others, right? And I think, and it doesn't mean we always forgive. Okay, at the end of the day, we will forgive. And in organizations, that forgiveness may take the form of showing you the door and wishing you well, but we don't do that around here. So, for example, some organizations have very strong rules and norms around, say, safety equipment in
Hmm.
factory or in any dangerous setting. And if you let's say Alcoa under O'Neill, you order a worker into a dangerous situation, and that is, as a manager, and that gets discovered, you're fired. I mean, that day, there's
Oh,
not.
yeah.
So that's just because there, even if the worker didn't get harmed, but especially if they did, but it's already predetermined to be outside the bounds of what we allow. So if you have clear
Yeah.
norms and rules, then you have to be tough when people violate them because you have to send the right message and because there's too much at stake. So I'm in, I have done a lot of work with hospitals and the issue of patient safety. And, again, human error will never go away, but we can aspire to zero harm. And you say, well, how can you say those two sentences next to each other? Human error will never go away, but we can aspire to zero harm. Well,
Yeah.
because we're in the catch and correct business. When our wonderful, fallible human beings make errors, it's okay because they got colleagues and the colleagues are going, oops, and they're catching and correcting before harm occurs, right? Now, occasionally the harm will slip through. And again, we have to sort of understand what happened and do our very best to make sure that doesn't happen again. But we're definitely, everyone must be a fan of reducing harm. I mean, I'm not in the business of advocating for more harm just because we need to be whatever, exploratory
Yeah.
and innovative. So partly error and failure aren't the same thing. And now, even more importantly, all failures are not alike. You alluded already to big and small, right?
Yeah.
To character and non-character. Fundamentally, I identify three kinds of failures. Basic, caused by a mistake. Basic doesn't mean small, by the way. You can make a mistake in a bank, for example, that could cost the bank dozens of millions of dollars, right? It's like big,
Hmm.
big stuff. Or you can make a mistake in a plant and cost someone their life, right? So basic just means simple and highly preventable. So let's do our best to prevent those things. Complex are the multi-causal, those perfect storms, those moments where 10 little things happen, any one of which on its own wouldn't cause a failure, but because of the unlucky combination of them, you end up with a failure, supply chain breakdowns in the middle of a global pandemic, for example.
Yeah.
And so we come to, again, at our best and with best practices and good leadership and great teamwork, we can prevent most complex failures with people speaking up and so on. Now, the third kind, this is a whole different category, right? The third
Yeah.
kind, I call them intelligent failures. And those are the still undesired results of thoughtful forays into new territory, right? So you're a scientist in a lab, you've got a hypothesis. And by the way, it's a super smart hypothesis, but lo and behold, you were wrong. Okay, right? It's
Yeah.
disappointing to be sure, but it's data. It's getting you, we hope, a step closer to your real goal, which is maybe curing this kind of cancer or whatever it is. So now, whenever we're talking about new territory, as in science or sometimes in, let's say, um, you know, eh, arts and elite athletics and on it goes. If you're trying to push the envelope, you're going to be in new territory. And if you're going to be in new territory, you're going to have failures along the way. So you have to learn to not only live with it, but learn from it as much as possible. So it's not about a balance, right? It's not the balance
Hmm.
between sort of being permissive about failure and yet what about harm? It's discernment. It's discerning
Yeah.
what's the nature of the context, how big a risk am I willing to take? Because one of the things that I will say about an intelligent failure is that it's no bigger than necessary. Like it's just big enough to learn, but no bigger. It's not so big that we've just, you know, lost all of our money on an uncertain investment or we've caused physical safety harm,
Yeah.
right? So we're thoughtful about our risk taking.
Even my back to my dissertation in 98, I've always been drawn to paradoxes, and
Mm,
especially within the leadership literature and organizational work. And
mm,
paradox meaning, two competing truths, both of which are they're both true.
right.
It was interesting because I had debates with my colleagues about, oh, so some of them would argue like we have a thesis and we have an antithesis, and then we get to the goal is a synthesis. And I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
think so. And I
Yeah.
love what you just said is like for our just our business leaders out there, organizational people out there, whether you're a first level manager or leading at a senior level, is Amy saying it's not trying to make that tension disappear,
Right.
but leaning into it with discernment that is really powerful. And Amy, so one of the things that I so appreciate all that is, my heart. I'm at Wild Leaders. We describe a focus on the one with an eye to the many, with this concept of how do we attend to the individual soul, the
Yeah.
person who's
Yeah.
in the halls or on the Zoom meetings and and to the that there are issues of scale that we have to attend to, both at the team level and the organizational level. And but I am so probably more naturally drawn to that individual. Like when I walk into a room of leaders and I
Yeah. Oh,
speak,
yeah.
I look at their eyes and I'm like, I know there's a complex set of variables going on in your life that's affecting how you're showing up. And one of the things that you mentioned that just got my mind thinking about this is this, like when it comes to trust, and I'm curious about this with psychological safety as well, is that we always talk about like that this process of trust begins within you.
Yes.
That's where it starts. And it starts with,
Yes.
that's why I couldn't help but just absolutely connect trust to leader development.
Right.
Because it's not like you said, trust is a relational thing. It gets really interesting and actually becomes real when it's between us. But that the foundations of that begin way deep inside of us.
Yes.
Will you say something about, I'm curious about your thoughts
Yes,
on that.
yes. No, in fact, so trust it's inherently dyadic because even if you have nothing to do with it, it's my belief about you that constitutes the term, the concept of trust. And
Yes.
I like to say it's almost, I mean, I'm being deliberately provocative, but I think trust is a choice. Like when people say, well, trust has to be built and trust takes a long time, I say, maybe again to be provocative, nonsense, right? Trust is a choice. And as a leader, you can choose to trust someone. And
Mm-hmm.
hey, you might get burned, but I think that's better than, I'm going to wait, I'm going to get more data, more data, more data until you've finally proven yourself trustworthy. And now I'm going to trust you. That's not trust.
Mm-hmm.
That's experience, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
trust means I am willing to live with the doubt. I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt, not me. And I believe two things happen. One, when I choose to trust you, most people, not all, right, will live up to that trust, right? You can feel it.
Yeah.
You can feel that I've stopped micromanaging or I'm not monitoring. I am trusting. Part of you will just want to live up to that trust. You do not want to disappoint me, unless you have a real character flaw or you're a criminal or you're someone who just wants to steal from me when I'm not looking. Fine. I'm going to have to live with the possibility that that might happen to me. I'm going to have to take that risk because of the benefit I get when I come as a leader. I come along and I choose trust.
That is so powerful and provocative for many people because it's moving outside of a default kind of,
Mm-hmm.
compulsion to say like, I trust you or I don't. And it's just like,
Yeah.
that's it. And
Yep.
outside of saying like in every moment we have a choice to make. Now, what the wise choice is, to be seen, right? And it also, Amy, it made me think about one thing we had to study because we were getting this question from CEOs when we would debrief our Wild Trust Index results. And so we provide them feedback very similar to the Net Promoter Score. It's a net trust score across at three levels: the personal, the
Huh.
team, and the organizational level. And they can see all these where they rate on these drivers at those three levels.
Building trust in your business starts with being able to measure it so that you can create a pathway for change. Our Wild Trust Index measures the drivers of trust at the personal, team, and organizational levels. We are building the largest database on the drivers of trust inside of organizations. This survey will inform growth imperatives and the necessary organizational change needed to fuel that growth. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.
One thing that one of the CEOs was asking about, you can tell when they're trying, even in a big organization, they're trying to figure out who the people are who scored low.
Right. Right.
And so it had us, we had to do this study. So we dug into our data to understand. So we have what's called the Wild Trust Quadrant, and it's basically a 2 by 2. And you can
Yep.
imagine if you have high team trust and low organizational trust, we call that islands of trust.
Mm-hmm.
If you had high organizational, low team, we call that is the shell of trust. So it's like an egg where the outside is firm, but it's a little
Yeah.
messy on the inside.
Yeah.
Then the stronghold of trust is where you've got high org, high team trust. And then the low one is, we call it a jungle of trust. And so
Mm.
what we got curious about was in organizations that score in the stronghold, what percentage of their employees at the individual level score in the jungle?
Mm. Mm.
And I think I'm getting this number right. If I remember, it's 41%.
Huh. Wow.
Which is so interesting because I always tell people that
Yeah.
we assume that trust is ubiquitous. Like if it's
Right.
somewhere, it's
It's
everywhere. And
all or nothing.
it's just
Yeah.
not
It's all or
true.
nothing. Yeah. Not
It's just
true.
not. And it made
Exactly.
me think about what
Yeah.
you were describing in this kind of this dynamic relationship, you know, between what's going
Yeah.
on in the individual, and then this reality that we think it's always there, and you're like, it's a choice.
It's a choice. And which side do you err on, right? Do you err on giving others the benefit of the doubt or err on the side of, I'm going to wait and see? Because I think people can tell. Like they can tell if you're still sort of sizing them up,
Hmm.
are you a worthy person or not? And since most people think of themselves as a worthy person, they like resent it a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you should trust me by now, right? I've been here a week. No, whatever, but so I think it's actually, and the provocative part is I think it's actually counterproductive to use phrases like, well, trust has to be earned. I understand why we
I
say that,
yes.
but
Oh.
what if perversely that just lowers trust?
Well, yeah, that is so good. Thinking about this intersection of psychological safety, there's a huge push, in the space of vulnerability, and I always remind people that vulnerability by definition is the openness to being hurt.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's like we talk about it like some
Yeah.
sort of, strength and
Soft,
like soft thing is like
weakness.
this
Yeah.
means if I'm vulnerable, I'm open to being hurt. And
Right.
just one side note also is that you made me think about we have a lot of friends in our ecosystem in the physical safety industry, like executive protection and law enforcement and so on. And one thing that they talk about that really shaped me over the last few years is that it's not about taking all risk away, like the
No.
paradox you were describing.
No.
Like they're responsible for defending the castle, but
Yeah.
also people want to come in the castle. So how do you,
Right.
how do you think about boundaries is so interesting. But that's not my question.
Yes. Yes.
Can you feel psychologically safe around a person who has not expressed failure, their failures?
Ah. That's a great question. And I always hate to say, this is the academic in me, yes, or no. But my instinct would be to say no, or at least not as safe as if they were willing, because all of us are fallible. All of us have made mistakes. All of us have experienced failure. And when someone comes across as either a know-it-all, or I do everything right, or I'm so perfect, the last thing you are drawn to do is be straight with them about your worries, your concerns,
Mhm.
your imperfections, because they seem to not have any. So that is inherently a kind of unsafe place to be. Maybe better put, it's a place where you are likely to err on the side of holding back, which describes low psychological safety, as opposed to erring on the side of speaking up, which is higher psychological safety. So all of that is to say, I think implied in your question is the question of, is vulnerability an important leadership attribute or skill for
Yeah.
creating learning environments characterized by
Yes.
psychological safety and risk taking? And I say yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Okay, that is outstanding. And I hope everyone here listening is hearing Amy coming back to learning. This return to learning.
That's
It's
what
like
it's about.
everything is learning is so good. In our research on trust, we especially at the team level, we were looking at the drivers of trust. We found that two of the top drivers, of the three, I'm going to hold the top one, were strength. In other words, that's part of our definition of trust is like I will not only be able to do the job, but I'll do it well, or I'll figure out how if I don't. And then also reliability, like consistency is
Yeah,
just reliability is a huge
right.
a driver. The top driver, and I know this leans heavily into something you know a lot about, is truth. So is the extent to which people were telling each other the truth.
Yeah, yeah.
Would you say something about truth
Yeah.
and candor in teams if you wanted people to take one big nugget away from this?
I have frequently said, if I don't have enough time, although Sabbath described psychological safety so well when she said it's safe to speak up, take risks, and be real. But my shortcut for defining it is it's a sense of permission for candor, right? So it is about truth telling.
Uh,
But that doesn't mean, oh, I don't like your hat. As a student of Chris Argyris, he used to use the term work relevant. And so, what I really truly want people to be truthful and candid about are work relevant ideas, questions, concerns, mistakes, deviations. Because we are working together to produce value together, and it's not easy. So it's about telling the truth about that. And that, of course, is an important part of trust.
Amy, this is so good. I am just so grateful for this conversation and for there's so much that people are going to get out of this. So thank you.
I enjoyed it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
It's been such a rich conversation. Amy, we want the people listening or watching to know what is the best way for them to connect with you and the work that you're doing to reach out and dive deeper.
Well, I'm on LinkedIn at Amy C. Edmondson, and I have a website that's also amycedmondson.com. Many books and articles and so forth. For those who love to read, there's a lot to read.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And we have one last wild question. Are you in a season of accepting yourself or changing yourself?
Can I be both?
Yes.
Yeah, I think those are two lifelong projects. I think I'm getting a little closer on the accepting. I'm still hell-bent on working on changing.
Lifelong projects. I love that. Amy, thank
Yeah.
you for such a rich and powerful conversation. Thank you for listening to this Wild Conversation podcast. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.